Twitter. The microblogging platform has made a whole lot of news recently with its recent purchase by Elon Musk and its proponents and detractors arguing about the way that speech on the platform should be managed. Should we have it as a free-for-all? Should we limit what they would consider dangerous speech by some people, or hate speech, or triggering speech? There's all kinds of questions about things going on out there. But I want to take this moment to focus a little more specifically on the aspects of engaging in one another, on the aspects of engaging with one another on Twitter or any actual social media platform. How do we as Christians best represent our worldview, our faith, and at the same time not fall into the trap of being considered a bigot or hating or things like that? Can we provoke a dialogue that both defends our points of view, but also triggers a response in others that's something other than just being slammed or scoring points? Also, I want to show you kind of some of my strategies with a specific conversation that I had with a couple of atheists just a few days ago. And so we'll be going through all of that on this. Come, let us reason together. When we talk about social media, of course, a lot of people are engaged in it today. It's a highly popular way of communicating with friends, keeping up on different events or even the happenings of folks around you. Social influencers, of course, become very popular. YouTube and Instagram are growing. TikTok has exploded, these short 1-minute videos that a lot of people have, especially young people, have become truly engaged with. Facebook has, I believe, over 1 billion users these days. Now, Twitter in the social media world is kind of like the fourth child, the one that doesn't get quite as much love as all the others. It has maybe 1/4 of the users of the other platforms, but it does seem to have an outsized influence in our society, especially among people, say, in the media or in the entertainment business, in the news corporations. They rely on Twitter quite a bit, which, if you think about it, is kind of strange. This is a microblogging platform. It only allows you to have 260 characters, not even 260 words, 260 characters to post little individual thoughts. So why is there so much attention drawn to Twitter these days? Well, part of it is because the people who are shaping the narratives pay a lot of attention to Twitter, as that's how they get their information, which of course causes feedback loops, causes bubbles in society. If you want to create a horrible noise and you have a microphone, the way you do so is you take a microphone and you put it into a speaker, so the microphone picks up the sound that the speaker is generating from the mic, and then it circles around and around and it amplifies upon itself. That's called feedback. That's what that high-pitched squeal is you hear sometimes when people are sound checking and things like that. It's painful, it's annoying, it's not pleasant. And unfortunately, it's the way a lot of folks use social media today. They only want to listen to those who agree with them, who will say the very things that they would have said if they had that opportunity, things like that. Others like to use these social media platforms to kind of pick a fight. And one of the things that I want to do is to kind of help you guys to understand how to engage people online where you're not picking a fight, but you are defending your faith. You are defending facts and assertions that maybe are incorrect. Now, I had the opportunity just a couple of days ago to engage with some guys on Twitter. It wasn't of my instigation, they decided to comment on a completely unrelated post. These were atheists that I was engaging with. But I think it's going to prove beneficial both in learning aspects on how to defend your faith, and we'll get into some of the specifics of the conversation, but also in learning tactics and how I approached the conversation from the onset. I always try to have an end goal in mind when I talk about these things. So what I wanted to do is wanted to share this opportunity with you on this podcast, and then hear from you. Make sure you leave your comments below and let me know what you thought about this interaction and what maybe you would have said or you would have done, or if you have any other questions about anything on here. And I'm going to call this the shifting sands of the atheist contingency idea. So let's jump into this. I was just commenting on another individual's tweet, something completely unrelated, when Felix Turner came in and provided this tweet here. He says, "Can Christian apologists explain where did Jesus' Y male chromosome came from?" Spelled incorrectly. Newborn sex is determined at birth by their parents' chromosomes, either X or Y. Males carry the XY chromosomes, females carry the XX chromosomes. When did Jesus' Y male chromosome came from? And again, I think he means come from in both of those instances. That's an interesting question. Why would Felix ask such a question? I mean, immediately we're talking about a miracle, right? How does any woman get pregnant if she's a virgin? This is common knowledge. I'm not asking people to believe this. I understand he's an atheist and he doesn't believe it. The problem is he's actually asking, where did the Y chromosome come from, as if he doesn't know. So this sends up a red flag for me already. I don't know that Felix Turner is being genuine in asking this question. He's provoking me to say something else. And, how do I understand that? Now, I don't know if he's an atheist or not right now. He might be someone who's just pondering these things. It's very possible. I give him the benefit of the doubt. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reply to him. And basically my reply was very simple. It was, well, it came from the same place as Adam's Y chromosome. Where did Adam get his Y chromosome? You see, if you hold that miracles can happen, if you hold that God can create Adam, then God can create Jesus in Mary's womb. It's really not any different in that regard. So that's the question, where did the Y chromosome that made Jesus come from? Well, that's easy. It came from the same place that Adam got his Y chromosome. So he naturally follows up, immediately says, well, where did Adam's XY male chromosomes and Eve's XX chromosomes come from? Exactly. Notice the exactly there. So again, you're seeing a little bit of hostility. And you can see here that I replied just simply, from God. Now, I'm doing this on purpose. The reason why I'm saying God, the reason why I'm just holding back is to say, he's either going to say, well, I don't believe in God, or he's going to say, well, how did God do it? And those are two separate questions. But because if you believe in God and he can do miracles, if he created all of, everything, then he can create this. And that's sure enough where this went. Felix, not being happy with that reply, turned around and said, how can an immaterial yet unproven God possibly carry a material set of chromosomes to insert into a woman's egg? Okay, so there's a couple of things going on with this question right now. We've shifted the debate a little bit. He says unproven God in all caps, like he wants me to argue about God's existence, right? But there's a second question in there, and it's how can the immaterial have some effect on the material world? Notice again, he says, how can an immaterial yet unproven God, how an immaterial yet unproven God could possibly carry a material set of chromosomes? Again, the question isn't typed grammatically correct. So how an immaterial yet unproven God could possibly carry a material set of chromosomes to insert into a woman egg? That's his question. Now I'm going to leave off the unproven bit right now. I'm not going to argue for God's existence in this. And I'm doing this again on purpose. And this is why. Because when you're in the reason-giving game, and I've said this many times, it's important that both sides have to give reasons for their beliefs. Okay? So when we talk about the material coming into existence out of immaterial, that kind of an idea actually has bearing on an atheist worldview as much as it has bearing on a Christian worldview. Christianity holds that God created all things, that all have their being in him, that through him all things hold together. He is immaterial, but he has direct access and direct influence on all of the material objects in the world. Now, the atheist worldview, it should at least, in most circles, understand that at some point there is a problem of eternal regression, right? So if you say, for example, where did you come from? Oh, I came from my parents. Well, where did they come from? They came from their parents. And you go back and you go back. Even in an atheist understanding, in an evolutionary sense, you've got to get back to, say, the first life, right? Well, where did that come from? And even if you leave aside the monumental problems of life coming from non-life, you still have to get back to the chemistry. Chemicals coming together. Okay, well, where did the chemicals come from? Well, they came from the formation of the world. Well, where did the world come from, right? And you have to keep going back and back until there's a starting point. There's a famous analogy. Supposedly it's Bertrand Russell. Stephen Hawking mentions this in his book, that it may have been Bertrand Russell, it may have been someone else, that talks about, he starts talking about the laws of nature and how the earth, it hangs upon nothing, things of that nature. And she says, the story goes, an old lady says, no, the earth sits on the back of an elephant that rides on top of a turtle. So, well, what's the turtle standing on? Russell says, well, it's another turtle. Well, what's that one standing on? She goes, oh, you're very clever. No, it's turtles all the way down. Well, that's called an infinite regress. That's actually a logical fallacy because there's no starting point now, right? There's no place for you to ground that first turtle's feet. If it just keeps going on forever, it makes no sense. You've actually not explained anything. You just keep pushing the problem back one step, one step, one step. So that idea of infinite regress works in terms of creation as much as it works in terms of Adam's Y chromosome. So he's going to say how an immaterial yet unproven God could possibly carry a material chromosomes to insert a woman. And what I did was I simply replied in this way, really, how does material come about at all? So you see, what I'm doing now is I'm actually asking him to give a justification for his view. Do you believe material has always existed? Or do you believe material came into existence at the beginning of the universe like everything else? You see the difference. There's a key point that I'm trying to drive here, is that I'm trying to get him to at least take some burden of responsibility for explanation for what he's asking. What would you accept? What makes materialism work? Where did the universe come from? And he actually answers this question. And he says, how do we know how physical matter came about? Were you present at the moment of the Big Bang when physical matter came into existence? No, you weren't, and so wasn't everybody else. If someone claimed to know how physical matter came into existence, he's lying. Nobody knows. Okay, I didn't make a claim. I asked a question. You see the difference here? Now, all of a sudden, he's on the defensive. I've not I've not insulted him. I've not said anything. I just said, how do we know about any matter coming about at all? And again, the idea is, has matter existed eternally or has it not? But he tends to deflect this question, right? One of the things that he's doing in this answer is he's saying, nobody knows. Well, that's actually not quite true. He mentioned the Big Bang, which is the colloquial term for the standard model for the origin of the universe. And the standard model says that all matter, energy, space, and time came into existence at a certain point. Current estimates are about 13.8 billion years ago by modern consensus, but somewhere 13.74, whatever you want to estimate. But the idea is that what the Big Bang is an explanation. It's not turtles all the way down. That's the whole point of the Big Bang. The whole point of the Big Bang is to make sure that we don't have this infinite regress. That's why they were looking at things. Matter of fact, when the Big Bang was first proposed, when the standard model was first offered, it was actually derided by a lot of popular scientists of the day. The consensus really was prior to that for an eternal universe, a steady state universe, the fact that the universe isn't necessarily having a beginning, that it always had been. But it was Wilson and Penzias' discovery of background radiation, cosmic background radiation in the 1960s, but that pretty much closed the door on whether the universe had some kind of beginning or not. That cosmic background radiation was uniform across the whole universe. And again, most people believe that that was the after noise, so to speak, of the Big Bang. But again, notice his tweet. What is he saying? What is he actually arguing? How do we know how physical matter came about? Were you present at the moment of the Big Bang when physical matter came into existence? Well, I don't have to be. What does that matter if I have to? You have to see it in order to understand it. Nobody knows. And he seems to have these little question mark emojis that are part of. But anyway, what I think Turner is trying to do here is dodge the question, and I think he knows it. And so I kind of call him out on it. I say, wait, you're obfuscating. My point isn't that I know what's happening. My point is, what was there before the Big Bang? I don't need to know the mechanics of the Big Bang itself. Was it material or immaterial before there was a Big Bang? What happened then? And that's the big question, you see, because he has to be able to answer that. What do you hold in that regard? If it was immaterial and material came out of it, then we know one thing, that the immaterial can affect the material directly. Now, you have to have an explanation for how that happens without a mind. But when we think of a mind, we think of an immaterial thing that affects the material directly as well. If I want to raise my arm, I can think about raising my arm and not do it, or I can think about it and I can do it. And when I think about it and do it, you have an immaterial object, your mind, acting on a material aspect of your body, your nervous system, and it causes your arm to move up. And you can possibly sometimes want to do that, try to do that, right? People with locked-in syndrome, for example, wish to raise their arms, but they can't do it because their body's not functioning. That doesn't mean that they're not desiring to do so or trying to do so. The immaterial aspect of who they are is trying to do so. It's just for some reason not getting through. So again, I come back and say, you're obfuscating. What happened before the Big Bang? And he, again, deflects. He says, how can possibly anybody know what was before the Big Bang if we can't even know what happened at the moment of the Big Bang? Anyone who claims to know that is lying to you and me. People want to speculate about events so distant in time without any data information for it. Okay, again, I don't understand why he just doesn't want to admit that what the Big Bang's whole project and purpose is to simply answer the question of where did everything come from? That's it. That's what it's all about. And that's exactly what I tell him. I come back and say the whole point of the Big Bang is it provides an explanation for where all matter, energy, and space came from. If the Big Bang brought all matter into existence, then whatever was before the Big Bang must be immaterial. So this is a strictly logical argument. If all matter comes into existence because of the Big Bang, then what happens before the Big Bang has to, by definition, be immaterial. Now, he doesn't want to concede on this point, because I think he knows that if he concedes on this point, he'll get hung up on it. And that's the problem. However, he comes back with an answer that actually is a little bit stunning. He says, wrong. Whatever was before the Big Bang, we shall never know what it was like. How is that true? Since the early universe is shrouded by thick cosmic fog that prevents light from that period to reach our telescopes, we cannot possibly know what the early universe was like for the first million years. Okay, there's lots of things wrong with this tweet. There's lots of factual things. I'm not saying that you have to even believe the Big Bang Theory in order to do it, but what he's arguing many different things. First of all, I'm not talking about the early parts of the Big Bang. I'm talking about what happened before. If all matter comes into existence and there was something that caused that matter to come into existence, that something has to be something other than matter. It's just plain logical sense. We can know things without watching them, right? If I tell you that all men are mortal and Socrates is a man, you can deduce from those two statements that Socrates is mortal. I don't have to tell you Socrates is mortal. You know that. That's a logical argument. And we can, as long as those premises are true, then the conclusion must follow. So if all matter comes into existence after the Big Bang and something else caused the Big Bang, then that something else cannot be matter. It's just straight up what we're talking about. He unfortunately says we'll never know what it was like. Okay, I'm not asking for specifics. I'm asking for one attribute. Is it material or immaterial? If all matter shows up because of X, then before X, there's none of that stuff that shows up. Pretty cut and dry. This is not hard logic to follow. Again, and he tries to obfuscate by saying our telescopes can't see the first million years. You don't have to see. You don't have to look into these things. You don't have to deal with it that way. So he's a little confused there. He then follows a second tweet and he says it this way. He says, to all intents and purposes, the early period in the history of our universe, from the Big Bang event to around 1 million years after that event, will be forever outside our knowledge. So when someone claims to know what happened at the moment of the Big Bang, he's lying to you, is what he says. Not part of the question, not part of the discussion. So what do we do with this? Well, so now Felix attaches my previous question with another answer. And what he says is basically a restatement of what he'd said before. He says, no matter how far back in time we look through the most powerful telescopes and radio telescopes, there's a point in space where light cannot penetrate the early cosmic fog in the early universe. And therefore we shall never know what our universe was like beyond that point. And I answered specifically and said, that's why physicists are using abduction. Do you even understand what the Big Bang is? Do you know what we're talking about? We're talking about why is there something rather than nothing? Why did matter begin? That's what we're talking about. That's the point that we're trying to make. And the answer was a little shocking. Now, this is when I start to see that there's a gap in his understanding and a gap in his knowledge. I don't know that he's just plain dumb at this point. When we start to jump into this, I think what's going on is he's so blinded by his need to not be wrong that he's not listening. anymore. And this has probably been true for a while, but again, I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt. I'm trying to pull this out. But when he has made 3 or 4 assertions now that because we can't see it, we can't know. Observation is not the only way to know things. I used the word abduction, which is what I was talking about before. It's an inference to the best explanation. It's not a deductive argument. Deductive arguments are certain. If the premises are true, the conclusion has to follow. But scientists and others, when they get into these areas, they can have reasonable guesses about things, understanding how, like atomic theory, quantum theory. Quantum theory isn't proven. We don't know it for certain, but it's not more than a guess. It's a heck of a lot more than a guess because we have the mathematical models to prove it to so many decimal points. In fact, when we talk about quantum matter, we don't understand it all at all. It's an amazing thing, but we can anticipate what's going to happen to several decimal places, which means we at least have some kind of knowledge because our results come back. And by definition, you can't see quantum matter either. It is by definition imperceptible. But I said that's why they use abduction in science. What was the response? Do you mean physicists use speculations? Of course they use speculations, although such speculations need to be based on sound mathematical models. You can't just speculate like guesswork in science. You need sound mathematics to base your speculations upon. Okay, that's not completely true. Yes, they do use mathematical models in certain areas, but first of all, these aren't speculations. Abduction and speculations are two very different things. Abduction would say that, so for example, we know that people can be born maybe 2 feet tall. It's possible that they grow to 2 feet tall or they grow to 8 feet tall. We've seen that as well. It doesn't seem possible that people can grow to 15 feet tall, though. The human body doesn't seem to support that. Now, again, we've never seen it. A person who's 15 feet tall and just dies, so we don't know. But we can make a pretty good estimation of that. We can take all of the data that we know and say we've never seen it before. So it's highly unlikely that it's that. It's a pretty good scientific statement. And we take it to be true, even though it's not a mere speculation. The term speculation is loaded, and that's part of the problem, I think, that's going on. So again, I try and call him out and try and clarify this. Abduction isn't speculation. But I don't want to get off my main point. And this is something that's very important to remember. A lot of times when we're engaged in these kinds of conversations, it's very easy to get caught in side trails, to rabbit trail off onto other discussions. He hasn't answered my point. He hasn't answered my question. What was the point of the Big Bang Theory? What question was it trying to answer? I'm still trying to get him down on that issue. Now, I've not even asked him what happened. I'm just saying, why does it exist? What were the scientists hoping to solve? You see, that's a very different question even there. And of course, he comes back and says, what do you mean? What was it trying to answer? The Big Bang Theory is speculative. It does not provide any certain answer. Wow. Since we can't possibly know what the early universe was like, we can only speculate that there was a very hot phase in the early universe. I'm not talking about the early universe. That's after the Big Bang. I said before, why is the Big Bang Theory postulated at all? That's the question. And you notice what he's doing. I think, again, he's dancing now. So you can't talk about mathematical models and this and that and not know the basics of what the Big Bang. I mean, most people understand the Big Bang is an origins story. It's an origins story. So why is he working so hard to dodge this? So I decided to break it down even further. Why is it called the Big Bang? Because that's a colloquialism. Like I said, it's a standard model. What does that even mean? What does the Big Bang mean? At least let's talk about the words. Why even call that? And that's the idea of the Big Bang is coined by Fred Hoyle that it was kind of a derisive term. Again, when I said that this model was initially dismissed, but I mean it says it's just some Big Bang that happened. You know, it was used as a point of rejection, so to speak. It was a point of rejection. So I'm just trying to get an answer. And he's doing his best not to answer me on this question. Now, either he has no idea what we're talking about here, or he's specifically trying to avoid my question. He comes back and said the Big Bang event wasn't anything like a bang or an explosion for what we can deduce from the CMB. Again, that wasn't my question. My question wasn't, did it bang? My question is, why did they call it that? You won't land on the idea that the Big Bang was a creation event. He won't say it. And at this point, I have to call him out on it. So I specifically said, again, not what I asked. You're trying to draw new inferences. And he says, don't keep asking questions that cannot be answered. Nobody knows what happened at the moment of the Big Bang, because of the extreme physical conditions in which it must have happened. So there's no point in asking questions about what cannot be known, even in principle. So he's restating his claim, but he's made a flaw. What has he said? He says, you can't ask questions that cannot be known in principle. So I've got him. What was his initial question? Where did Jesus get his Y chromosome from? God. Remember his objection? You mean an immaterial and unproven God? How could he do that? Oh, are you asking a question that cannot be known? What did he say here again? There is no point in asking questions which cannot be known even in principle. That's what he said. That seems to be pretty clear. So I follow it up. Well, will you abide by that same principle? Are you willing, if that's the rule you want to live by, are you willing to live by it on your own? That's the question. Now, he comes back and says, what principle? And I said, don't keep asking questions you can't be answered. Will you play by your own rules? Now, at this point, that portion of the Twitter thread ended. He didn't continue on there. However, part of the problem with Twitter is that you can pick up and create a sub-thread from a previous interaction prior to that discussion. So it doesn't keep everything in a single line per se. And that's what we have here. He came back from this, if you remember when I talked about this one, that's why physicists are using abduction. Another one of his replies are saying, do you mean physicists use speculation, right? Of course they use speculations, although such speculations between created on sound mathematical principles. And I had answered, abduction isn't speculation. Again, what was the point of the Big Bang Theory, right? But he had also answered, but the CMB only points to a very hot phase in our universe history around 13.8 billion years ago. It does not tell physicists anything else. Now you notice he's very specific on some of these facts. You notice he knows 13.8 billion. He's using the term CMB, which is the cosmic background radiation source, microwave. Cosmic microwave background is what CMB stands for. But it does not tell us what the universe was like. Besides that, it must have been very hot, very dense, and very compact state of matter. So here's a second thread that we start to engage in. And again, I come back to him saying, yes, I know, but you aren't answering my question. What was the purpose of formulating the Big Bang Theory? What was the question they were trying to answer? And he says that the Big Bang doesn't provide any certain answer, and it wasn't supposed to provide any certain answer from the moment it was formulated. What? You mean they just came up with this because it sounded like fun? This is a staggering reply. It's a theory that wasn't supposed to answer anything. That's where we're at in this conversation. That's how far he has to regress in order to try and save face. The Big Bang didn't try to answer any question. There was no reason for it. We just came up with it because it sounded fun. The moment it was formulated. That's amazing. I said it's a theory, so it certainly isn't implied, but that's beside the point. And he says it's a speculative theory only. Speculative means that nothing about the Big Bang is certain. No, speculative doesn't mean not certain. That's a definitional error. Speculative means much less than certain. Speculative means it's one of many possibilities, and other possibilities may have equal weight. And we have no other possibilities that have equal weight. And we have evidence for this beyond having speculative means, Joe bought a new car yesterday. I haven't seen it yet. Might be red, might be blue. I tend to see Joe wear more blue clothes than red clothes, so I'm going to say it's blue. That's a speculation. That's based on very limited knowledge. We have more than very limited knowledge in this. But notice something else that he says. Nothing about the Big Bang is certain besides it must have been very hot, very compact, very dense state of physical matter. So the Big Bang is physical matter? Huh. Or is it what physical matter came into being? I came back immediately and said, are you saying matter has existed eternally? Is that what you're arguing? Can that be true? Now you're back to the problem of turtles all the way down. You see, no matter what he tries to do, his worldview isn't fitting. It's not explaining anything. He's ducking and dodging, but he can't come up with any answers. Yet he wants to demand answers from other folks. Now, at this point, a third party came in. And I've noticed this trend from time to time on the internet when some of these internet atheists engage like they do. One of the things that they're just trying to do is score points. They're trying to see if they can take down the Christian. And what they do is they share these discussions with their friends, and it becomes a mutual admiration society. You'll see that the atheists will go and just like every single one of their friends' comments, just to, and then when they comment, their friends come back and like all of theirs, and it's all self-congratulatory. But a second guy enters our conversation, cosmic particles B3 reign. And here's what he says. Nothing in the universe is eternal. Everything is subjected to the second law of thermodynamics that states that entropy, disorder, increases naturally with the time passing, and it never decreases. That's true, and that's an argument for the universe having a creation point. So everything that exists is bound to age, decay, and eventually die. That's irreversible. Okay, I have no problem with that. But now I come to the question that I was trying to get to all along. So why then is there something rather than nothing? If nothing is eternal and everything decays and dies eventually, then why is there something rather than nothing? What was the difference? And he says, good question. Why is there something rather than nothing? Because a universe made of something has a great chance to last longer than a universe made of nothing. You can't have a universe made of nothing. A universe made of nothing would be a very unstable place since there could not be physical laws to govern anything. Okay, this is a common misunderstanding that certain physicalists offer. Lawrence Krauss is the most famous for this. But when we talk about nothing, nothing means No thing at all. No attributes, no potentials, nothing. You can't have a universe made out of nothing because the universe is a something in and of itself. It's something that can be labeled. A nothing is the absence of everything. And that's why I say there's no such thing as a universe made of nothing. It's like saying you've made it a four-sided triangle. It's nonsense. A universe made out of nothing makes no sense because you're making something. I mean, it's like saying I'm holding in my hands a horse made out of nothing. Don't you see the horse? The horse is there. It's made out of... No, there's no horse because there's nothing. You can't have a horse, right, if there's nothing. Look it doesn't exist. There's no horse here. A horse made out of nothing is no horse. No thing. No universe. Nothing. No universe. It's pretty clear. And again, he dodges. Remember, second person in this conversation. Exactly. There is no universe made of nothing in nature, since only a universe that is proven to exist, ours, is made of something rather than nothing. This is dreadfully confused. But in a theory, a universe made of nothing is not impossible. It just wouldn't last long enough for anyone to notice it. Yes, it is impossible. I don't know what your definition of nothing is, but you can't have something, you can't use nothing as building blocks and build something, even if that's the universe. It doesn't work. I'm sorry. But notice he said in nature. And I thought that was interesting. So I said, you use the qualifier in nature. In nature means that there's a natural world, a universe. You're now assuming that which isn't there when we talk about these universes. Out of nothing, nothing comes. Again, I'm trying to get him to understand the point of nothing. You have admitted that the universe is finite, not eternal. Therefore, the universe has to have a starting point. Again, back to my question. I don't want to get too hung up in semantics here. Does the universe have a starting point? If you're admitting that the natural world is made out of something, then it must have a starting point. His response, out of nothing, nothing comes. Exactly. Where did God come from? Nothing. You notice how he changed the subject. Our universe is finite in time, right? Must our universe have had a beginning? Not necessarily so. Okay. Another universe could have existed before ours. We don't know, but nothing prevents it. Okay, so let's take these one at a time. I'm going to leave this up here so we could take these nothing. Out of nothing, nothing comes. Exactly. He agrees with that. Where did God come from? Nothing. No, God never came from, period. God is eternal. God has existed. So asking where God came from is like asking where's the corner of a circle. It's a category error. Here's the deal when we start talking about these ideas of God. The argument isn't that everything has to have a beginning. That's an incorrect argument. Christians never argue that way. We say anything that begins to exist, anything that has a starting point, has to have a cause for its existence, has to have an explanation for why it came into being. Things don't just pop into existence from nothing. Out of nothing, nothing comes. But if you have a starting point, then you need an explanation for it, right? If you have a line will have a starting point. If you have a piece of rope, piece of rope has to have two ends. But if you have a circle, then you have no end to the circle. It's by nature something completely different. And God falls into that category. Philosophers have talked about this for a good 1,500 years. This is what we mean when we talk about God. God is by definition eternal. The second problem that he has is he says another universe could have existed before ours. Well, that may be true, but that's a separate entity. Just because somebody built a car before my car doesn't mean that my car was built by the previous car. That's not how cars are made. And just because there may have been a universe before my universe doesn't mean that that universe created this universe. Unless he's talking about the oscillating theory. He might be talking about the idea that the universe shrinks and explodes and then shrinks and explodes. But if he holds to that view, then his tweet over here that says that there is nothing that exists eternally is false. Because the oscillating universe would be an eternal thing. You see the problem there. So, must our universe have a beginning? Not necessarily so. Another universe could have existed before ours. Are you holding to an oscillating universe? Are you holding to an eternal? But you just denied that that was true. You just told me that there's no such thing as eternal. All things die and decay. So I try to wrap this up, but again, I'm starting to sense that these guys really don't want to admit any of this. God isn't contingent by definition, I tell them. The universe is. Positing other universe doesn't help you since time, space, and matter are all bound to this universe. So you can't just say, what was another universe? No. We're trying to explain time, space, and matter. And those are the products of this universe. And again, he ignores this point and goes off to say, who says God isn't contingent? Couldn't the universe also have existed under different forms and different circumstances before our universe came into existence? What prevents another universe to have existed before ours? Well, it's simple. You can't have turtles all the way down. That's what I'm saying. And that's what he said. But regardless, I don't want to get again into a semantic argument. I said it wouldn't matter. Universes are closed systems. Time, matter, and space are inextricably linked. This is what Einstein showed. If the universe had a beginning, it had to come from a completely external cause. Existing under different forms and under different circumstances means existing eternally. You see the point. So, again, he rejects that idea that existing in perpetuity would have to be eternally, but cycling universes would still not have to have existed forever. These could have been a moment in time outside our own universe time dimension when the cycle of the universes began. But what causes it? That's a, if you want to talk about speculation, that's a speculation. That's just like, maybe it just happened this way. I have no proof. We've already admitted we can't see before our universe. We have no mathematical models to show why this would ever happen or what kind of laws would be governing this expansion and contraction, this oscillation. Who sets those laws? What's the law governing material that does that? Because that's not nothing either. If there are laws governing this system, then we better know what's going on there. Okay, after this exchange ended, I tweeted out a link to the beginning of it, and I just said, hey, this was an interesting thread. You guys may want to follow along. This is a fun thread. And Mr. Turner came back, and he decided to try his luck again. And he said, the Jesus story happened 2,000 years ago, so it's perfectly legitimate to ask questions about an event that happened in historical time of which we have plenty of information. The Big Bang happened 13.8 billion years ago outside of the historical time for which we don't have information. And I clarified for him. You asked how the immaterial can have an effect on the material. Remember, I told you at the outset, this was my plan. This was my thought process. This was where I was going at the very beginning. If one cannot question whether there was matter before the Big Bang, then one also cannot question whether the immaterial can interact directly with the material. Sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. Okay, let me spell this out for you, as maybe you didn't get it. Let me spell this out for you very specifically. And he said, the immaterial cannot be explained. How it could interfere with the material. That's different from being outside of questionable. Of course it can be questioned. The theist cannot explain that. It's another matter for them to consider. Again, this is where we start playing word games. And I said, you can't even explain why material exists. If you can start with that, then we can have the discussion. And he tries to justify it. I cannot answer how the material came to exist simply because there's no information for how it came to exist. Well, why isn't that true for God? There's no information. There's no scientific test for God. And there shouldn't be, because God working miracles would be supernatural. Supernatural, definitionally outside nature. Science is the study of nature. Therefore, science can fail to study the supernatural. It's pretty clear. The material exists simply because it could. Wow. It must have had a mathematical probability to exist. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. A mathematical probability to exist. He says everything that has a mathematical probability to exist or happen naturally, wonder why he puts that qualifier in there, of any value greater than 0 will eventually happen against all odds. Now, there is not a more false statement than this. This is the most stunning thing I think I've heard in our entire conversation. That doesn't even make sense. No, there are things that have an infinitesimally small probability of existing, but the fact that it's infinitesimally small means that it won't happen in the vast majority of cases. So it won't happen. We don't have eternal time. That's the problem. It's not going to happen against all odds. That's what odds by themselves are. He says given long enough time. But that time has to approach longer than the number of seconds that were ever even conceivable. He goes on to say, matter exists because it must have had a mathematical probability to exist. It must have had a mathematical probability to exist. Well, why can't you say Jesus' Y chromosome is the matter that had a mathematical probability to exist greater than 0? Oh, what do we do with that one? And again, I don't know what else to say on these things. This is staggeringly naive. It reminds me of someone who's just grasping to try and save face so that they can try and patch their worldview together. But do you see the leaps in logic? Do you see the amount of faith they have to extend? Do you see how much they have to assume in order to just try and keep this worldview together? And that's the whole point. Now, there comes a point in time where you say, okay, I'm not going to waste any more time on these jokers. And it was right about this time where they started self-congratulating one another. And I said, okay, I'm done. I'm out. I just left the conversation. But this is ridiculous. Sometimes it's best to, when your adversary is hanging himself, you just don't get in the way. You just step back and let them go. And if you say things like everything has to happen and the material had to have a greater than 0 chance, not if there's nothing. If there's nothing, there's 100% probability that something won't come out of it. That's just the way it is. But this was our conversation. And I hope that it's been a little bit enlightening for you. I hope you get to learn a few things for it. It was an interesting exchange. I'm not sure what to do with these guys, but I hope that you can see how kind of thinking through in advance where you want to go and trying to pull a conversation in that way will lead them to show that there's really, it's important in the reason giving game that you have to be able to account for your faith and your beliefs and your worldview as much as the other guy. And Christians today tend to not do that. They tend to take all the burden of proof upon themselves, but never ask the other guy to bear some of that responsibility as well. So that's part of what we would do. Again, if you get into these conversations, you don't have to argue. You don't have to throw insults. You don't have to deride people. I used no names. I used no invectives. But I tried to stay, number one, stay on topic What is the point? Where are you going? You got to know where you're going. And you've got to make sure that you continue to bring the conversation back to that track, even when they try to obfuscate, even when they try to veer off and challenge you on other issues. Leave that off to the side for right now. And then ultimately, when they start spinning, when folks start kind of hanging, and it may be, if you're talking to someone who's earnest, they'll start to reconsider their beliefs. They'll start to think about it. If you're talking to someone who's not earnest, then it's good to know that, so you just get out. You just get out of the conversation. You don't need to waste your time anymore on people who are just basically arguing for the sake of argument. And that's where I kind of felt we were going at this point now. Not one of my questions were directly answered. They would, again, dodge them, deny them. But when they start saying outlandish things that anyone who's halfway cogent would laugh at, then you say, okay, well, I don't need to say anything to you anymore about, what your beliefs are. I think you've just illuminated everybody else as to who's more credible in this conversation. And that's all we can do. So I hope you've learned a few things. Blessings on you, and come back again next time for our next Come Let Us Reason Together. Thank you for watching this Come Reason video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to see more videos like these, consider subscribing to our Come Reason YouTube channel by clicking on the subscribe button. And you can follow us on social media. Lastly, if you'd like to help keep these kinds of videos free, consider providing a donation by clicking on the donation button beside me. Thank you.